Meeting, 6th of December 2023. Welcome everyone, and those who are listening to this, welcome. And I want to begin by acknowledgement to the country. In recognition of the deep history and culture of this place, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which the city of Hobart was built. I acknowledge the determination and resilience of the Palawa people of Tasmania, who have survived invasion and dispossession and continue to maintain their identity, their culture, and rights. I recognize the value of continuing Aboriginal knowledge and cultural practice and pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. I want to acknowledge the presence of the elected members. We have Councillor John Kelly, or Alderman Louise Bloomfield, Councillor Ben Lohberger, Councillor Ben Ryan Passault, Councillor Bill Harvey, and Deputy Lord Mayor Helen Burnett. Thank you very much. And the apologies and leave of absence. For apologies, we have Councillor Coates, the Lord Mayor Anna Reynolds, Councillor Zelinda Sherlock, and Alderman Madi Zuko. Thank you. Number one on the agenda, the confirmation of minutes. It is my understanding that we can't confirm the minutes because we have just finished the meeting, so I'm taking this liberty and authority from the chair to say we'll defer it till the next minute. Number two, the agenda item, consideration of supplementary items. Are there any? No, thank you. Number three, indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. Are there any? No, thank you. Number four, transfer of agenda items. There being none. Number five, planning authority items, consideration of items with deputations. We have items 6.1.1, 86 Argyle Street, and we have deputation, the representatives Steve and Monique Ljubljana, and the applicant, Sam Habeli, who's the architect, and Mark O'Brien, the ERA Planning. And we also have with us Nick Booth, the Heritage Officer of the Hobart City Council. Thank you.
I move that we do that.
Thank you.
We consider those deputations.
All in favour? Thank you. Carried unanimously. 6.1.1, 86 Argyle Street. We'll have the deputation, so we'll begin with the representatives Steve and Monique. If you would be able to take the chair. So are you by yourself or?
I'm by myself with my wife had a tractor accident, so she couldn't
Is it okay if I call you Steve?
Steve, yes.
Okay, okay, thanks Steve. So take the chair and just speak to the mic. You'll have 5 minutes, you have 5 minutes, and then when there's about 30 seconds left, I'll let you know.
Sure. Okay, can you hear me? Sorry?
You're welcome to sit if you wish. Whatever you're more comfortable.
Better. Thank you, Chairman and councillors, for giving me the opportunity to speak. So we own the building next door to the Ocean Child, and basically I just want to reiterate what my written representation was or is. The objection we have with the development, which pertains entirely to the right-of-way, which we have a right-of-way, and also 27 Melville Street has a right-of-way, and we've had issues, with that right-of-way and now enjoyment of it, and which has, led to this situation where we can't see how this development can go ahead with access off that right-of-way when Ocean Child has no legal right-of-way on that laneway. It did have some access in 1877, but as I understand it, what the legal representation or information we've had is that Ocean Child needs to show continuous use since 1877 to be able to retain or have that right-of-way positioned, replaced onto that piece of land, which actually has no title, which we are actually in the process of having it adhered to our title. That being said, it's a very narrow laneway in which we need that for deliveries. We have a wine business there, which we do sales of wines, deliveries, so we need trucks to deliver produce. Having pedestrian access and trucks and deliveries is not very good when you've only got about a half a metre each side of the truck, if that. Very, very tight. That's probably the only other thing. And apart from that, if there was no access off that laneway, well then we have no objection. We think it's a great idea. I think the development of Ocean Child, for the rest of it is great. If they could, move their access onto Argyle Street or onto Melville Street, I think it's problem solved.
Anything else you want to say? That's
no,
the only issue.
that's it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Thank you, Councillor Prasad.
Yeah, in the notes that we've received, there's some suggestion, and I'll ask a more detailed question to the Director, but there is some legal advice being sought over the right-of-way.
Mm-hmm.
Is that your understanding as well, that it is a bit unclear and they're trying to clarify?
Not really. I think it's fairly clear. Ian Cornelius is the leader in sort of establishing title ownership and things like that. Yeah, it's basically we have a right of way, and so does 27 Melville Street, and nobody else.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions? Okay, there being no other questions, thank you very much for your time. Greatly appreciated. You can go back to your seat now. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have Sam and Mark. You can both come together, and you have.
I've got 10 copies. So keep one, so I think we'll have enough.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So you both have 5 minutes, and then when you have about 30 seconds left, I'll let you know.
Thank you, Mike.
So the 5 minutes is between the two of you, so you just have to share.
Yeah, so I'm here. I was the applicant for the application. I'm here to answer any questions that might come up, but I'll defer to Sam as the architect to run through the deputation.
Sure. Thank you, councillors, for your time today. Obviously, this application is recommended for refusal. The property is listed under the City of Hobart Heritage Register. It's not listed with Tas Heritage. Now, going through the planning process, the statutory planners have in the report, from a statutory planning point of view, basically recommended it for approval. However, the heritage grounds within Hobart City Council have recommended it for refusal. And this is, I've tried to simplify this and just put this on one sheet so we can quickly understand it. And my understanding is there's two grounds. The first one is height and bulk and subservience, to do with the height of the extension sitting above the Ocean Child. So the vision here is to reinvigorate this 1840s pub come 1940s Cascade pub into our 2040s pub. That will be something similar to the Telegraph. It's always good when a pub gets a birthday every 100 years. So the concept is gastro pub over 3 levels, including an open rooftop that is partially covered. The extension is set back to help with subservience, and then there are 2 accommodation units on the upper level. Now, I think a great precedent to look at is straight up the road, which we look at the Tasman Hotel that's been redeveloped, and that's a fantastic redevelopment. Now, we grabbed those planning docs and did some measurements on that. Now, the planning report states that's a 5-storey building. On Davey Street, it's a 4-storey building. On Davey Street, it's approximately 17 metres high, as you can see by the diagram, and the extension is approximately 10 metres. That represents a 59% increase in the height. Now, that has obviously been approved. Now, our Ocean Child height is 7.9 metres. Our extension at the front is 5.3 metres. Also understanding that is set back. That represents a 67% increase. If we drop the height by 400 mil, it would be a 59% increase, exactly the same as the Tasman, which is a clear precedent. So we believe that that can actually fit the planning scheme in regards to heritage based on that. The second grounds for refusal is around internal demolition. So The 1840s pub is what we've got the red rectangle around on the right-hand side. So it was quite a small, modest pub. And you can see these are the drawings when Cascade purchased it in 39 and redeveloped it in the early 40s. There's some solid existing walls through the centre there, which we're actually keeping on the ground floor. So we're keeping the 1840s fabric. It's worth knowing when Cascade grabbed it in the 1940s, they pulled it to bits. They pulled the whole roof off. There's a whole new roof. They pulled the floor out and put a whole new facade over the top. Now, we understand the Hobart Heritage Office's view on not playing around with the streamlined modern facade of the 40s, which they've re-skinned the old pub, and we believe that there's a lot of value in that, and we want to retain that. However, the internal demolition of the hotel rooms, particularly on the upper level, and the rooms on the lower level from the 1940s, in our view, hold limited heritage value. And if you have a look at that upper floor, we've got tiny little bedrooms with a shared bathroom. If we're going to progress this building forward, ready for 2040 for its birthday, we need to come up with a good strategy to make this work, and we believe that the proposal of turning it into a gastro pub for the area, along with some accommodation, is a good proposal. So I'm asking today that you look to overturn the decision and approve it with some relevant conditions, and if we want to match the Tasman in height and drop it by 400 millimetres, we're happy to do that, but it's kind of here nor there.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions? Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question about your use of the Tasman. I noticed that was actually in the planning papers, but there was also an example given of the Telegraph Hotel. What are your thoughts about the redevelopment of the Telegraph? About the way
I honestly think the Telegraph is a great redevelopment, and where it works in the area based on the yield you can get for the lease, it's viable to go and just turn that into a pub. Whereas in this location, to actually make the project work, we need an extra piece. In this case, the two residential units turn it into a project that can actually work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
For you, Chair, just maybe I got my maths wrong here, but this 59% increase on the Tasman building, is that, have you got your maths 100% correct there, or?
So 10 divided by 17 is 59%? I got it right.
Just to me, I just had an accountant check that and I did it right.
Yeah. Yeah. And then if you go 5.3 divided by 7.9, it's 67%.
Okay, we're looking at it from a point of view that...
Excuse me, do you want to ask a question or you want to make a comment?
If it's through you, Chair, could I get my colleague Bloomfield, who's done some mathematics here, his opinion on this?
Yeah.
Okay, we're looking at it as a percentage of the total, so...
Percent of the total height.
Yeah, so 10 metres is 37% of the total, and I haven't done the other one, but that's quite a lot
I thought it was 40.
Yeah.
I thought it had 40 in the planning report, but I thought my maths was wrong. But
no, I'm looking at it from a different point of view.
Yeah. Excuse me, can I make sure that if one finishes, then you don't have the dialogue, please? Thank you.
Yeah. Would you like me to answer that?
Please.
Yeah, so that's 40% when you look at it that way. And then what did you have on the Tasman, 37?
The Tasman we had 37%.
The Ocean Child will be 40. So
Yeah.
it's similar.
Well, yeah, so that's completely wrong, the 59% increase thing, if you...
Depending which way you're looking
It
at it.
depends on your base.
Yeah.
Excuse me, can I just please just make sure there are no comments? One
Oh,
person
excuse me,
finishes and the other person...
through you, Chair.
Thank you,
Councillor Harvey, if I've got a question about the building height, I think it's extremely relevant.
Well, okay.
Well, what's your comment?
Well, I don't know why you're extending it. If the number's wrong, then I'd be more inclined to talk about how you sense the height rather than the percentages, whether it's 30, 38 or whatever.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. No further questions. Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? Councillor Passal.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, With regards to internal, particularly, I have less interest in the second floor, but the ground floor pub fit out. What's your understanding of its state of origin? Is it original or is it associated with the Cascade?
It's associated with the Cascade. There is, if you look at the diagram on the top right-hand side, you can see the wall that goes through the centre, and then that is being retained. So you can see the dark wall that's going through the centre there. So that was retained in the 1940s, and then we're retaining that in this proposal as well. But if you actually go and look at the site, like I said, the whole roof's pulled off. It's been fully pulled apart in the 1940s and reskinned.
And just to clarify, so that includes the all the timber work, ornate timber work and stuff that's inside and around the bar is like the 1940s origin, not?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Deputy Lord Mayor.
Through you, Chair. Just in relation to the question about the right of way, could you just answer those concerns that Mr. Lubiano?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. So that is, in our view, a civil dispute and not a planning matter at the moment. So we had the request through the planning process. Now, our client is currently working with a surveyor and their solicitor to actually have a right of way over their title. Now that's obviously in difference of opinion to Mr. Lubiano, but their understanding is they can actually register a right of way over that title. Now we're only, just for reference, we're only talking about a fire escape and access to the apartments.
Thank you. And just another question, if I may. So, and you might have covered it in your answer, just in relation to that height extension. There was no thought to set it back?
So it is set back about 1.5 metres?
1.5
Yeah,
metres.
at the moment. And
on all sides to the road?
correct. Yep. And if I can just respond to that as well, and the break of the rooftop deck is a key consideration to it's not a very beautiful architectural word, but to debulkify the form. It's almost similar when you look at the Tasman image, what they've done, how they've just put a little break through the centre there, and it allows the top pavilion to float, to appear like it's floating a little bit more.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Lubin.
Thank you, Chair. Just one more question. I just wanted to clarify what the right-of-way will be used for. So it's a fire escape, and I assume that means that people will come out of the building. There won't be a physical fire escape sitting in the stairway or anything?
It's all on our title, the door and the entry. It is the entrance to the apartments at the top, but it's also the fire escape from the apartments, but not for the pub.
So that was part two, I guess. It's going to be the access way, the permanent main access way for the units.
But again, our understanding is that's a civil matter rather than a planning matter. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The materiality of the two extra floors, what will that be? Will it be tilt-up concrete slabs or brickwork or? I know it might not be a planning issue, but aesthetics matter.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So it will be a lightweight cladding of a Luca bond or similar, so it will resemble the aesthetic of glass. So the idea is the glazing works in with that, and we'll it's the wrong thing to say, but it's the when you don't have the budget of the Tasman Hotel, it's the way to get that aesthetic.
And just the relevance of the Tasman Hotel, Tasman's surrounded by other tall buildings, so that doesn't have an impact on me. Whereas the buildings upstream of you, those little heritage cottages and that, how do you see the relationship between your proposed height and those lovely little cottages that have been, I think, really well renovated and restored, plus the Sawtooth building, the old tin, whatever they were called, minties.
Minties, yeah.
So the relationship with the height to them as it is now versus with two additional stories.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that was addressed by the planning officer from City of Hobart and seen as compliant under the performance criteria. Reason being, it's stepping up towards the city. So across the road, and I might need your advice here, but the zone across the road I think allows for 10 or 12 stories on the corner where the uni's purchased. I'd need to clarify that, but anyway.
Central business zone across the street, yeah.
So it's up to 45 metres.
Sort of two separate elements to to the overall height, and one assessment is the planning assessment of the broader streetscape, and another is height in relation to the subservience of the heritage impact. So I think in my opinion, from a planning point of view, you're looking at another 1 to 2 stories above what we're proposing before you start to question whether that works with the compatibility of the streetscape that's there. So if you look at the streetscape elevations we've provided in the planning submission, you can sort of see it in the proposal in context of the streetscape and how it fits in with the heights around it.
And one more. With regard to the deco, the style of the building as it is now, will that be altered?
No, so that's streamlined modern as a architecture style, and then that will be kept as it is. We will give it a birthday and a paint, but we kind of want to honour that because it's a pretty cool facade that happened in the 40s, albeit they pulled apart an 1840s building at the time.
Any other questions? No questions? No, is there any questions to our heritage officer? Any questions?
Will be when we open the item, I suppose, yeah.
So anyone would like to move a recommendation? No.
Can I just ask one further question,
Okay.
if that's okay, Chair? Thank you. The 400 mil that you were talking about, just for my own completeness, what's the consequence to your design? Is it just ceiling height for the apartments?
It's ceiling height for the rooftop bar. So it's currently got a 3 metre ceiling height. It'd be brought down to 2.6. It's just not as desirable. But and I suppose you just clearly look at the two images and you go, well, the bulk of that sitting above the Ocean Child versus the Tasman Hotel, it's a lot less. And I think the 400 mil is really not going to make that much difference. But from a numbers point of view, you can tick a box.
Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question in relation to the windows and the fenestration. To me, it's just in total conflict with whilst not trying to mimic, this completely frameless window and the solid to void ratio just seems... any comment on that? Because I noticed the Heritage Officer's report says it's just totally incompatible in that regard.
Yeah. So obviously we're not trying to mimic the style, but the concept is for that to feel like a glassy reflective block, similar to the Tasman. And yes, it does have a couple of pieces sculpted out of it for those decks at that point. So it's probably, in all honesty, in a 2D drawing, or sorry, in a line drawing, a black and white line drawing, I think with some colour, it's going to end up looking more like the Tasman image below.
Yeah, it is very hard to see on the sketches that have been provided any of that, I guess. And also to your setback, like to me on the designs that have been provided, it looks virtually, it is street front, but it is 1.5 metres back, I think he's mentioned.
Correct, yeah.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
You used a word to describe what the place is going to become, which I wasn't... Could you say it again?
Gastropub?
A gastropub. That's where people get sick? Or
It's a trendy term for a pub with good food, basically.
right, okay.
So there's one down here. Is it on Davey Street? Did they call that a gastropub? On the Tom McHugo's. Yeah, bang on. Yeah.
Okay. But have you... Like, okay, I'll tell you something I've been impressed with in Hobart. It's a little place called the Alabama Hotel, where they didn't do anything really.
Yeah.
They created atmosphere. What are you trying to create in this space? Just a place to eat, or a place with a unique atmosphere? Because now that I know what a gastropub is, when there's one on every corner, that kind of means that gastropubs are a thing, and they come and go. But the Montague Hotel, for example, the Alabama Hotel, it's used all the little rooms, and it's unique, and people during MoFo will probably go there than your place. How do you juxtapose a sense of, or the feel of a new cavernous space versus the intimate spaces of other, hipster pub kind of feels?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we haven't designed the fit out yet, but we definitely want to bring some soul of what happened in the 40s into the fit out, and it's going to depend on the operator. But a great example, I've worked with the developer on this. We did the Bridport Distillery. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, which was an old church that we extended and turned into a distillery, and which does food and bev as well. And although the building typology is completely different, we did the same thing there, where we ended up with some cool little nooks and crannies with booths in the corner, and played around with that old church vibe and brought the soul of that out, pardon the pun, and told a bit of a story with it. So I think that would definitely be the concept, pending us getting the right operator. So we won't be the operator, we'll be the developer and try and get the right people in there to run it.
So they'll do the fit out?
It's up to negotiation, it depends, yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, well, I'm a bit concerned about, I've got another point made here by Malto Bar and Cellar, who operate next to you, and they appeared not to have current enjoyment of that little laneway. They're suggesting that they're unable to access it when they need to because they've been inappropriate sharing, if you like to call it that way. So if we were to approve this, this is actually going to be worse, and they'll be less likely to be able to enjoy. What are you proposing to do with that? Because I know that you say it's a civil matter, but it's hard to approve something if we know that people around are going to have substantial trouble operating next to you.
Yeah, so currently it's on a bit of a peppercorn lease, and it's respectfully a average operation, and that's the tenant, and the tenant is obviously the issue there, not the owner or the developer. I actually think by cleaning this up and giving it its birthday, for one, that will help with that. But the second point is, our view is that we will actually get a right of way over that land, so we have equal share of access as well. I don't think it's fair to not approve a development from a statutory point of view based on someone parking in a laneway.
Any other questions? No questions. Thank you very much for your presentation. Appreciate it. You can go back and see. Okay, someone. Councillor.
I would move a approval of this development, which can either be on officer's advice, can either be a foreshadowed or a amendment. We don't have a motion before us, so I suppose that an approval of this application is reasonable. So I would move that at this stage. I might hold my comments until we hear a little bit more debate, but I'll get us started with the debate.
Deputy.
I wonder if we can hear from the Heritage Officer in relation to this, please. I have a couple of questions. Thank you, through you, Chair. Mr Booth, the recommendation from officers is to refuse. Could you just take us through the reasons why you've come to that? I mean, obviously we've got the points, the conditions, but and just to hear, I'd like to hear how we've arrived at this application.
Through you, Chair. Obviously, the building is heritage listed, and therefore we have to treat it as we would any heritage listed building. The fact that it's used for commercial use isn't something that we take on board. There has been a pub operating from that corner since 1844. It was actually bought by Cascade Brewery in 1884 and was operated by them continuously up until about 1988. And in 1939, they asked for an extension. Now, the extension was done by Phillips and Watson, who were leading architects, or emerging leading architects at the time. They also did the West Point, the original West Point Hotel. So they were extremely well regarded, and therefore we would say that this is one of those buildings where, yes, it was extended in 1939, but the extension is to a degree just as important as the original corner part of it. The assumption that because some parts of it were removed during the lifetime of the building, and here I'm talking about the demolition internally, the plans that I've submitted from the 1939 development indicate, if you look at them, they indicate black walls and red walls. The black walls are the walls that were not demolished during that conversion. So you can see that there were a reasonable amount of the original 1844 pub that still survived at that time and were maintained. And indeed, if you were to go into the pub now, you'd still see that in terms of the corner part of it, you've got the front bar and the back bar. That's something that's been established from the very earliest parts of the actual pub itself. Now, the interior, the timber interior that you see, we're not entirely sure where that comes from, but I would suggest it might be as late as 1980 or something of that period. So the actual interior fit-out is not considered to be of any heritage importance. It's more the actual hierarchy of rooms and the original rooms that are in place. And it is notable, again, when you look at the development plans from 1939 and you compare them to the actual building now, the extension that was done in 1939 at the upper floor is entirely unchanged. So those rooms are exactly as they were intended by this leading firm of architects in 1939. And indeed, when you go in there, it's perfectly clear that that's the case. The whole layout is as very similar to the Alabama, I think, as you've noted, very similar sort of layout in terms of hotel, albeit in a slightly more informal style. So in terms of the interior, you know, whilst a lot of attention is directed towards the exterior, which is obviously very important, we as heritage officers would say that it's the interior that is just as important. We always take a holistic approach to heritage listed buildings, and especially when they are largely intact from 1940, largely unchanged, and were actually done by a leading firm of architects, then they have a degree of importance that I don't think is reflected in the supporting heritage report that's been produced by the applicant. In terms of the remainder of the proposal, in our opinion, the extension is too large. The demolition that would occur to the interior would remove all vestiges of the original building and its sense of, as you say, smaller rooms. The development, in terms of its proportion to the size of the original building, is too large. It has an overbearing impact upon the original scale of the structure. And in response to the comments with regards to the two examples that I included in my report, those are really shown just as an illustrated matter. It's worth remembering that those are actually within the Sullivan's Cove and are dealt with under that planning scheme, and therefore we always say that there's no such thing as precedent, but that's particularly true in this case, is that they would have been considered under a separate set of provisions.
Question,
Oh.
Deputy.
Sorry, have you finished?
No, I'm happy to take some
Okay.
questions.
And the other question, I mean, in relation to other buildings, is one on that block, because I remember we had a development application for just about 3 doors down on that same side, and there are a lot of heritage considerations for that application. Obviously, a separate application for apartments, unfortunately, haven't been built, but the streetscape was a real issue. So I just want some comment around that. But I don't know, Mr. Booth, if you're involved with, I think it was a former men's gallery or something and it was a very important pub on the corner of Argyle and Bathurst Street, which is now the Vodafone building, which has its own beauty and structure and so forth. But that was there was certainly an argument around the heritage values of that pub, which had been cladded probably in the 1920s or so, I think. But it was an earlier pub. Can you just talk around those couple of things, please?
Through you, Chair, taking the first issue with regards to streetscape. Now, the area of the city that we're dealing with, there isn't a requirement that it has to respond to neighbouring buildings, so therefore that's not being considered within the report. However, it does obviously occupy quite a prominent corner location. It's visible especially from Argyle Street as you're climbing up the hill, and therefore its visual prominence is going to be fairly pronounced. It is going to be a development that's quite clear and will have an impact within the sort of surrounding area. In terms of the other example that you relate, it kind of comes back to my previous comments in that sometimes it could be said that because a building has been used in a commercial concern and then may be badly treated in the past, that somehow there is nothing of interest from a heritage point of view. But in actual fact, if poor alterations were sort of stripped back, and especially where the interior has kept most of its original features or floor plan or floor hierarchy, then there is no reason why that building could not have been refurbished, reused and brought back into a much more dignified sort of use than what it ended up, or should I say, eventually led to the feeling that it was of no actual use anymore and could be safely demolished.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, you mentioned about the fenestration, and can you just speak to me about how you would see that being more appropriate to what I'm looking at here in the plan? Because I'm just really wrestling with this. Maybe I'm misguided. To my way of thinking, it doesn't mirror the bottom part of it, and that solid to void ratio, particularly on the left-hand side, there's a massive chunk of solid there, which is totally conflicting to the bottom. Have I got that wrong, or was that a design principle that you would think there? I just wanted to see what your thoughts on that were.
Through you, Chair, with regards to the actual design of the extension, then obviously fenestration is one of the distinctive features of the 1939 facade. And that is clearly in terms of its ratio to solid to glazing, and also the form in which it takes. We as heritage officers always encourage that new developments clearly appear as new. We don't want to try and provide advice that would result in pastiche of the original features. But even so, we would expect it to still reference and respond to fenestration patterns of the existing building. Otherwise, you end up with an arbitrary response, which essentially could mean that that structure could sit on top of any building. And when you get an arbitrary response, it's unfortunately means that it's not respecting or mirroring or trying to reinterpret the character of the existing building.
Councillor Harvey.
So, through you, Chair, so heritage can refer to the exterior, the interior, and also the provenance, the builders, the architects. That all adds up to the historical value of a building.
Yes, through you, Chair. Yeah, and of course, you know, other things that haven't been mentioned, the cultural impact, the number of people who've visited that pub through the very many years, the very many people who have actually a fondness for the pub. So there's always a sort of indefinable cultural milieu that sort of sits over the top of these things. You can't really quantify them, but I think it would be wrong to say that it doesn't exist.
So all that, through your Chair, all that adds to the story and the history.
Absolutely. And of course, we are talking about an extremely long story, an extremely long history, and you can look at photographs of the site in just at the turn of the century. You can identify so much of the existing area and how in actual fact, even though it's got the new cladding, it really hasn't significantly changed that much.
Yep.
Any other questions? Councillor Passau.
Thank you through you, Chair. So on the cultural heritage side of things, is there an acceptance within heritage that continuing use in the way it's always been used, the needs will change to continue that cultural story? So in this case, I'm referring to the pub as a pub was in 1840s and the expectations of clientele for a pub in the 2040s. Is there relevance to continue that cultural heritage, and is that part of your deliberation?
Through you, Chair, yes it is. Obviously, one of the things that we looked at was the fact that we are looking at a site that had gone through a sort of second life, for want of a better phrase, and that therefore was there an argument to say that the current proposal was merely an extension of that sort of a sort of third life, as it was. However, as I say in my report, it is a matter of proportionality and how much alteration, demolition that is required in order to be able to achieve that. Now, the planning scheme makes it fairly clear that when you have a cultural heritage significance to a place, all issues need to be satisfied, and that includes environmental, social, safety reasons that have to be seen as being of a greater value to the community. And in this case, under the current application, all that's actually being provided is that there's an economic imperative from the owner that unless they were to do all of these works and all of this extension, then there is no way that that site is economically viable. That is the only thing, the only case that's been put forward. There's been no submission to back that up. And even if there had been, there were still these other things that need to be satisfied, i.e. that there is a social, that there are a social need for the change that is greater than what the existing heritage building actually provides to the community. And it also has to be shown that there are no prudent and feasible alternatives. And from an economic point of view, which I think was one of the issues that was raised before, the Alabama, for example, which is probably, I would suggest, of a similar sort of size and with similar sized rooms, has taken an economic approach to how it sort of markets itself, which has been extremely successful. And so when there is potential, well, when there is the opportunity to look at how other businesses have operated and no other economic modelling or no economic modelling has been provided, I would say that it's difficult to say that it sort of meets that test.
Yeah, just a supplementary question, which is you reference in your report facadism, and I guess would you agree that facadism is not necessarily a bad thing? Some people there are various views on whether or not facadism has its place within heritage management as a compromise between complete demolition and complete preservation.
Through you, Chair, I think that there are a range of views on facadism. Facadism generally within the heritage profession is not considered a prudent or an acceptable method, unless I would suggest the facade that is being kept is worth preserving. The building that it sits in front of is so degraded that it is totally unusable and has nothing of any heritage worth. And the building that then sits behind it still references the original sort of building that sat there and doesn't overtower or overburden the facade itself. So, you're not just slapping a sort of 1 or 2 story facade onto a 5 or 6 story building. So I think it's an extremely difficult thing to do successfully, and to me it's never a good solution from a heritage point of view.
Councillor Harvey.
My question is, would this building still be listed as heritage after this makeover or this change?
Through you, Chair, look, I don't know if I'd want to make any sort of comment on that, but look, there may be a suggestion that at this point it's so degraded that we might merely look to say that we should just heritage list the facade. But sometimes, even when a building is degraded to that extent, then it might be a more honest approach to say that the whole facade, the whole building should be cleared away.
In which case, through you, Chair, that would lead to the next opportunity to demolish the whole thing.
Yes, through you, Chair, yes, that's right.
Any other questions? No, thank you very much. Thank you, greatly appreciated, Mr. Booth. Well, we have a motion of approval subject to conditions, and I'm going to ask Craig if you could put it on the screen so you can have a look at that. Thank you, Craig.
While we're waiting, Chair, could I ask a question of the Director through you? Director, could you just fill us in on the right-of-way issue, whether or not it's a planning issue and whether it will have an effect on this proposal?
Through you, Chair, no, it's not a planning issue. As the applicant has stated, this is a civil issue. Planning doesn't require the consent of any landowners to make an application except when it relates to public land. So you can obtain planning permission over anybody's land, essentially. It's obviously then the next step, the next question is, do you have the right to carry out the development in the application? And I suspect if they don't gain access to the right-of-way, they might have difficulty with the next phase, the building phase, but that's a matter for the applicant. It's not a question for tonight.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so Councillor Harvey.
Chair, look, I'm struggling with supporting the motion to approve this. I'm happy with the officer's recommendation, and I've been interested in heritage, heritage buildings for 40 years. I did heritage studies as part of my degree back in the 80s, and I did learn then that the interiors matter, and I've always thought interior matters, and I've always hated facadism, and there's some terrible examples of facadism in Hobart. One really sad one was the building on Argyle Street. Argyle Street's taken a flogging over the years. It was an amazing red brick facade, but the interior, and difficult to work with, but the interior was full of these these really beautiful, amazing cast iron beams that held up the floors, and thick beams and boards that were throughout the place. And a creative mind would have turned that into something unique for Hobart. You look at the Myer building and the Myer facade in Murray Street. It's an example of what facadism, why we shouldn't support facadism. And I lament the loss of the men's gallery that the Deputy Lord Mayor referred to as well. Not the loss of the function, but not the loss.
The Duke of York Hotel.
Thank you. Thank you.
But not only that, there was also a little row of Federation shops next to it as well, which I thought were lovely little shops. Lovely shops.
Shop tops.
Yeah, the shop tops. And the hotel, we were given this thing about it was so bad that it needed to be demolished, which was just not true at the time. And it was a split vote for the Vodafone building. It just got over the line, and we lost another piece of heritage. Another tooth was punched out of the face of Hobart when we lost that hotel. And we've seen that way too many times. And I'll go back to the Alabama. The way they've turned that into a successful business, I'm really enthusiastic about. And another one, which is I'm really interested in, was Montacute in Battery Point. And I remember looking at that back in early 2000 or 1999, whatever it was, and it was this, backpackers, and it was taken over by people with a vision, and they turned the backpackers into a thriving business, which is a different model. It's not upmarket, but it's really well designed.
Is it in Stokehall Street?
So,
Yeah. So I'll be foreshadowing refusal of the motion tonight, because interiors do matter. And I grew up in Max Hotel in Melbourne, which was the oldest licensed hotel in Victoria at the time, at 1835. Didn't own it or live in it. I just was there every holiday period. and I got to visit the cellar because I like going down the cellar, and I knew the whole building, and it was full of these little rooms that people lived in all the time. It helped having a policeman living in one of them, but those rooms were really valuable. They were always occupied by people, and the bar and the interior was the original 1835 hotel. Another one was the Stork Hotel on the corner of Franklin Street and Elizabeth Street. We then were there for a while, and that was a beautiful hotel, and now there's nothing there because they demolished it to put up a 40-storey building. And the loss of that heritage fabric across time impacts your city. And you go to Launceston, and Launceston didn't get involved in a punch-up and didn't get its teeth knocked out. Hobart, sadly, has lost a lot of its heritage buildings, and the changing of heritage buildings over time also deteriorates the overall heritage of Hobart. Every time we lose another building, and not that we're losing a building, but we're changing a building from a heritage building that has a great story into something that might cut the story to an end, and we'll end up with photographs rather than the actual fabric of the building. So I thank the Heritage Officer for his explanation tonight and the way he's answered questions, and he's really reinforced why we should follow the officer's recommendation for refusal tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. So what we have, we're debating in at present the approval, but we have a foreshadowed motion that that for refusal according to Councillor Harvey. So we'll debate this one first. Councillor Kelly first, and then Councillor Passol.
Thank you, Chair. This Ocean Child Hotel is such a beautiful building. It's one of those gems of Hobart, similar to the Alabama as we mentioned before. You look at the Shamrock Hotel, the Hobart City Council Civic Centre, and there's a few others. And there's nothing like that streamlined sort of post that 30s, 40s era, post-deco, that's got those classic clean line curved elements. And I get it. I mean, these corner pubs, they have to be have new life breathed into them, and I'm doing this exact same thing with an old heritage building now, Australia's oldest pub, and I've done it previously for the last 30 years of my life. So I fully understand the commercial viability of having this sort of thing done, because that's what's going to keep this building and this business going. The trick is, of course, to get the design right. It's so hard, and there's just so many shades of grey which may or may not be right, and that's just the hardest thing, is to get it right. But I fully support the notion of the development of this. I cannot support this current design that's in here, and I'll just quickly quote the reason, and I concur with Council's Heritage Officer, because it will not be subservient and complementary to the listed place below it, that is, due to its bulk, scale, materials, built form, setback, fenestration, setback from frontage, siting with respect to listed elements. There's a lot to like about it, and I congratulate the designer and the developer for their initiative. However, I just can't quite get it over the line in its current form. I'm sure with some alterations that will be done to the satisfaction of the Heritage Officer, this will and should happen. But unfortunately, this current application I will not support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Passol.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's interesting to have a proposal for a heritage building actually come before planning, unlike developments in our past that received retrospective planning when works were done without the appropriate approvals in place. It allows people to sort of cast judgment before it's done, which was not the case in other developments. And this is a really interesting proposal. So we have a pub that has always been a pub. And this is right next to the Hobart ambulance station, so I know this place very well. It's not currently doing well. It's not currently surviving as a pub should. It's not thriving, particularly with its proximity to university education facilities, which should be a goldmine for a pub. And the relevance to planning and heritage here is about cultural heritage, that the culture of this place has been a watering hole for the people. And the people have told me over the last few days since this was public that it's important to them that it remains a watering hole, that it remains a pub, that it remains something that people want to go to. And while there are examples such as the Alabama where they have successfully carved out a niche, I think it's important to recognise that it is a niche and that there's only a certain amount of room for that style of pub and of entertainment. I think that this is sensitive, and the development is sensitive, and I do very much like the Tasman Hotel, which was also recommended for refusal. Tasman Hotel sits on a site that is Parliament site, the Parliament Square site, which is arguably my favourite development in Hobart and potentially Tasmania. So I show my bias, but this echoes some of the marks left by the Tasman Hotel, coming from the streamlined modern style. I think that small rooms on the second floor, for my values, and my values are shaped by what is important to take forward. What do we value moving forward? Is it the building height? Is it the building appearance? Is it the internal features? Is it merely the fact that this building was built a long time ago? What is it that is important? What will people look at in 2070 and say, that's still important today? And my belief is that the beautiful facade that is not original, and we need to make that really clear. It's not original, but it still remains of heritage significance, and it's still a beacon at the top of the hill as you rise Argyle Street. For me, that is important, but to modify it, to make it future-proof and usable moving forward in the vein in which it has always been intended as a pub, I think we can't go past that. So that's why I've moved to approve this. And I think that heritage values, because it talks to community sentiment, it talks to what is important to the community, and our heritage officer did reference that himself as to what is important to the community. And in my interactions with the community about this particular development application, the overwhelming sentiment is that it should go ahead. And I think that speaks volumes about the sensitivity, the design, and its place as staying as a attractive place to drink and socialise and build community. And I think the final 2 points I'll make is that the building height is not of a concern to me. It's of a very similar height to the fire and SES headquarters across the road. It's situated directly opposite a drive-through McDonald's, and a likely high-rise UTAS development will be across the road. So in the context of that environment, I believe that 4 stories is adequate, and I recognise that within the planning scheme, if there was residential component to this, then they could have actually gone a further 1.5 metres up, and that would be accepted. So I think that that's an important point to make, and with regards to the internals, there are multiple examples on Melville Street and Argyle Street of internals being completely lost to more significant buildings where the building has changed use completely, and the best example I have of that is the old penitentiary site, which became an ambulance station. This one is retaining its state as a pub. The penitentiary turned into an ambulance station. They're vast contrasts that are only 15 metres apart. So again, that's why I'm moving this, and I would ask my colleagues to consider those values carefully.
Thank you, Councillor Posselt. Anyone else would like to speak to this motion? Deputy.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Look, I think we've had a pretty good discussion. We've heard from the applicant, we've heard from our heritage expert, and unfortunately I think what I'm hearing from Councillor Posselt is probably not really looking at this from the considerations that we have before us. The conditions of refusal are around the significance of this building in a heritage context. I think that's missing in the, and I can't read all of the reasons for approval, or conditions of approval, so it might be better to have that emailed to us, because it's very hard to to see that on the screen if we could. However, I think there has been the opportunity from council officers, the planners, the heritage experts, to work through this application better, and unfortunately that hasn't made the grade in my estimation. So I can't support the reason for the conditions for approval, or the thought of approval. This is one of those places which will go. You know, we will lose these significant corner spots, so I can't support the application.
Thank you, Deputy. Anyone else wants to speak to the motion? No. So I'll put the motion then. Those in favour of the motion for approval? 1. Those against? Yeah. Oh, sorry. In favour, 1. Right, yeah. And against?
No.
Councillor Kelly, Alderman Bloomfield, Councillor Lodeberger, Councillor Harvey, Deputy Mayor, and Councillor.
The motion is lost. Thank you. And we will now take up the foreshadowed motion.
Move the officer's recommendation for refusal.
Thank you. Now, anyone should speak to that? Anyone would like to speak to that? No. I just want to make a few comments, if you don't mind. Please, with regards to planning, you know, I've always am of the view that as a planning authority, I've got to look at the rules in front of me. Now, having had a very close look at the arguments presented, under the rules, it is very clear for me, having read the arguments presented and the evidence provided, for me not to support the recommendation by staff. Now, it is not my personal value that should come into play. It is not what the public is saying out there, which is good, but at the same time, it is my view that we take the public view, but we bring it alongside and test it with the rules of the planning scheme. And if it passes, we approve it, but if it doesn't, then that's where my difficulty is. And this is a particular application where we have the discretion, and on the basis of the facts given to me and to us, I have difficulty supporting it. But if it comes back in another form with some adjustments, I would be quite happy to have a look at it. But I think it is a good move that they want to do this, taking into consideration the points made by our staff. So I'll put the motion then. Those in favour
of the officer's
recommendation as put.
Aye.
Aye.
Those against?
Aye.
Okay. For those in favour,
Show of hands.
please. Yeah.
Alderman Bloomfield, Councillor Lodeberger, Councillor Harvey, Deputy Mayor, and Councillor Gutter.
And those against? The motion is carried. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Okay, the next item on the agenda is 7.1, Delegated Decision Report.
So moved.
Moved by Deputy. Any questions?
I had a couple. Yeah, where are we? Just got a question about the demolition, new jetty and change of use to visitor accommodation in the adjacent area of the River Derwent, a $2.5 million project. Can I ask we get some details about that? And I just wanted to ask what was the reason why such a large proposal was delegated and didn't come to us?
Chair, I might ask Mr. Icon to answer that one.
Through you, Chair. So it didn't trigger any of the delegations to come to committee, so it wasn't over height, it didn't exceed the floor area square metres, and it didn't get enough representations. So it's the jetty at the bottom of Waimea Avenue, and it's a partial demolition and rebuild, so I expect it's fairly expensive to do that work out on the River Derwent, but it's not necessarily a substantial development. Yep.
Any other question? Is there a follow-up question, Councillor Luberg?
Thank you. I'm just looking at my notes, but it might be in the next item, the Proctors Road.
Yeah.
60 Proctors Road.
Yeah,
Is that
that too.
Yeah, yeah. Is that in this one or is that the
No,
next one?
It's in advertised.
It's in advertised. Okay,
Yeah.
we'll get to that next. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
83 to 89, Brisbane Street, partial change of use to sports and recreation. What are we getting there?
Through you, Chair, I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head. I can have a look and find out for you if you like. Come back to you.
It's only $80,000, so it must be very substantial. Pickleball court and a
Can
car
you tell
park.
me the planning reference number for?
23613.
Pool table and a cafe.
That looks like a maybe.
Yeah, okay. Anyone else with any other question? We'll come back to that.
Oh, you good?
Yeah, I'm good. Sorry, through you, Chair.
Okay.
It's a yoga studio.
Other one, okay.
It's very popular.
Sorry.
Thank you. Can I just come back to the item that we just had questions about, just to dig a bit deeper for the jetty? I just pulled it up on Google Earth. This is the kind of heritagey looking collapsing jetty that's immediately after the casino if you're driving southbound. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair, it's directly opposite the bottom of Waimea Avenue.
Yeah, which is that. Yeah, so there's two jetties that protrude out past the casino. Both have overhanging, like undercover dinghy storage and that type of thing. My question mark is the visitor accommodation component and also heritage component. Was a heritage assessment part of that approval? And have we ever approved visitor accommodation that is actually on the Derwent? Like literally on.
Pier.
Okay, Elizabeth Street Pier, slightly different
The one
context.
over there.
So,
They're the two questions. So was a heritage assessment done? So no heritage assessment and...
Heritage listed.
And is there any precedent other than Elizabeth Street Pier, which is a totally different context, for visitor accommodation on a jetty? Because like Cornelian Bay has very specific land use stuff about the boat sheds. Is it within the planning scheme to build visitor accommodation on top of the river?
Through you, Chair, the planning scheme does extend to a certain extent into the river, and there is also a provision under the legislation which says that basically anything that's connected to the shore is also captured by the planning scheme. I suspect that it's the questions you're asking relate to the zoning of the land. I might pass to Mr. Eichen, who might be able to shed more light on that issue. Maybe.
The zoning is environmental management. And so it's a discretionary use in that zone, but it's certainly approvable. It's also needs to be considered by the owner of the Derwent, if you like, which is the state government, basically. So it's been through Crown consent with the state government. It comes to us as a planning application, but it's a discretionary use and approvable on that basis.
And the only access for it, as I understand it, is off public land. It's off the foreshore walk. Off the footpath, off the foreshore walk.
Off the footpath, yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'm a bit, I don't know if this is a bit weird to go through delegated, given that I've just like kind of looked at what it is and gone, there's a whole lot of red flags to me to putting a short stay accommodation on a jetty, which I don't think we've done before. Is it done? Is there any way it's done?
No, it's approved, yep.
any other questions?
Just through you, Chair, I just had a question about 19 Yardley Street. Are we seeing the conversion of some of that commercial in North Hobart into housing here? Some of the commercial areas?
Yes, is the short answer. Yep, so it's a conversion, including a heritage listed smaller building into 4 dwellings. So again, that's been approved.
So that's a car repair place or something at the moment, isn't it? Something like that?
Something like that, yep.
A lot of tidying up to do there, I would have thought.
Yes. Of course, yeah.
Any other questions?
I had so many questions on.
Well, it's because we only have
Thank you.
one item, people are
Yeah.
dragging it out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
So, someone move, we have already...
I've moved it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Received a note. Thank you. All in favour? Carried unanimously. And 7.2, planning advertising application.
Yes, 60 Proctors Road, Chair. We just had a question about what's going on there. What is that? It's a quarry, isn't it?
Through you, Chair. It's a sport and recreation use, so it's incorporating a ropes course and a zip line and something I'm personally excited about as a rock climber, a climbing wall in the old Proctor's Quarry. So it's been with the council for some time and it's been through general manager consent as well because it relies on our roadway and it's a challenging road. But it's at this stage unlikely to come to committee unless it's called in or we get representations, although it's finished the advertising period and I don't think we've had that many representations to trigger.
Imagine there's not a lot of neighbours there.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think that's a really...
Any other questions?
Oh, we don't comment on these things, sorry, yep.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have another one just about 301 Sandy Bay Road, which is number 24.
Two.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Just wondering that's changing to, given it appears to be part of the Sandy Bay campus, I assume. Just looking at that address at Churchill Avenue. What is the change to 24? It's Sandy Bay Road end. Yeah. So it's buildings next to the rugby field.
Through you, Chair, the description from the applicant is partial change of use to provide for an office use other than directly associated with staff, students and visitors to the university. I'll just check the plans. It appears to be located in the building
Oh, it's not next to the rugby field car park, but it's the next one up towards Sandy Bay, I think. Sandy Bay Road.
It's right on Sandy Bay Road next to the car park. Yeah,
So just to confirm, that's a change of use to something that's not for students or staff.
correct.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other further question? Someone has already moved that we...
Yeah, I've moved it.
Okay, thank you, Bill. All in favour?
Aye.
Carried unanimously. Thank you. Questions without notice? Any questions? No question. Oh, one question. Thank you, Deputy.
In relation to the last meeting where we had to adjourn because we didn't have a quorum, how many planning meetings in this term have we had that situation?
I would need to take that on notice just to double check that I don't give misleading information.
You got that, or do I need to write that down? No, I'll send it.
Any other questions? No. Thank you.
The second one.
9, close. Someone would like to...
Move.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Move.